All right, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a newly appointed NHL general manager for just a second. Imagine you've just pulled off an absolute miracle and won the draft lottery. You are holding the golden ticket. But you've also got a roster completely defined by highly paid superstars and, let's be honest, a pretty brutal history of playoff heartbreak. So, what do you do? Do you run it back one more time, or do you do the unthinkable? Like, do you actually trade a generational talent to kickstart the ultimate immediate rebuild?
Welcome to this explainer. I am so incredibly thrilled to have you here today because we are diving into what is honestly one of the most fascinating, high-stakes turning points that any sports franchise has faced in recent memory. We're going to break down the sheer madness of the situation currently facing the Toronto Maple Leafs front office. Armed with the 2026 first overall draft pick, the new GM, John Chayka, is sitting at a total crossroads with his captain, Auston Matthews.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll quickly look at the Maple Leafs' current crossroads, then dive into the actual logic of a trade, check out some crazy blockbuster trade proposals, see what building a new young core looks like, and finally, wrap up with cap space and the future.
All right, Section 1, the Maple Leafs' current crossroads. We really need to start by understanding the frankly immense leverage the Maple Leafs suddenly have. By miraculously winning that 2026 first overall pick, John Chayka doesn't just have a great asset, he has the power to completely redefine the entire timeline of the franchise. He holds the right to select an absolute phenom like Gavin McKenna. But as you know, with great leverage comes a massive complication. And that complication wears the captain's C.
Looking at this timeline, it's clear this isn't just about money, right? It is all about control. Back in his early restricted free agent years, Toronto definitely had the leverage, even though they paid a huge premium. Then came that precedent-breaking extension. We're talking 4 years, a whopping $13.25 million average annual value. But the kicker? A full no-movement clause. And that brings us to today. We've officially arrived at the absolute climax of this timeline. So there's this incredible power dynamic at play here. Chayka is sitting there holding the first overall pick, which basically means he doesn't actually need to cater to the old core just to get superstar talent onto the roster. But because of that no-movement clause we just talked about, Matthews entirely controls his own destiny. If he wants to stay in Toronto, he stays. But if he signals he wants out, or if Chayka just decides, you know what, it's time to blow this whole thing up, well, that tension creates literally the ultimate what-if scenario for Toronto. Okay, moving right along to Section 2, the logic of a trade, which brings us to a massive question. Why on earth would a team ever trade a guy who just scored 69 goals? Let's transition into the objective, purely financial logic behind why moving a player of this caliber is actually a real conversation happening in Leafs Nation. Just consider the sheer financial weight of a $13.25 million AAV contract. Depending on where exactly the cap ceiling lands, Matthews alone commands somewhere between 15.1% and 15.9% of the team's entire salary cap. I mean, when you have just one player eating up that massive a slice of the pie, it inherently limits your ability to build a deep, truly balanced roster around him, especially when you're looking at the blue line.
So let's compare these two realities. The current Core 4 era has basically given Toronto this incredibly top-heavy payroll, virtually zero cap flexibility, and, well, heavily scrutinized recurring playoff struggles. Now contrast that with a hypothetical blown-up era. We are talking massive cap space, multiple top 5 draft picks, and a super dynamic under-25 young core. It's honestly the difference between trying to break through a brick wall with a highly expensive hammer versus just deciding to build an entirely new, state-of-the-art house. Which leads us to Section 3, the blockbuster trade proposals. Let's look at the actual trade frameworks and see how these massive packages could dramatically transform the Maple Leafs asset pool. The source materials actually details several fascinating scenarios where Toronto could find perfect trade partners. Basically, teams that are desperate for a superstar and have the future assets to actually pay for one. First up, we've got the San Jose Sharks. The Sharks have this absolute abundance of young prospects right now, and they desperately need a franchise face to speed up their rebuild. In this proposed framework, Toronto sends Matthews out to California, and in return, get this, they land the number 2 overall pick, which they can pair with their number 1 pick. Plus, they get a top-tier prospect like Michael Misa, who went 2nd overall just last year, along with another first-rounder and a solid defensive prospect. It's a staggering return that just immediately restocks the cupboards. Then there's Chicago. the Blackhawks are obviously hunting for a superstar to play alongside Connor Bedard. Whether it's Matthews or William Nylander heading to the Windy City, our sources highlight how Chicago's incredible wealth of assets could yield the 4th overall pick in this year's draft, plus some really high-end prospects like Frank Nazar and defenseman Sam Rinzel. Just think for a second about what that would do for Toronto's future depth. And you know what? The options don't stop there. Just briefly looking at some alternatives, Utah could step up and offer top-tier prospects like Tajai Eganlaw and Caleb Desnoyers. Or imagine a divisional rival like Detroit literally backing up the truck with young NHL-ready pillars like Marco Kaspar, Simon Edvinsson, and Lucas Raymond. The overarching theme in all of these scenarios is super clear. Toronto's focus remains squarely on acquiring elite young pillars and massive draft capital, so they can build a truly sustainable winner. All right, Section 4. Building a new young core. Let's shift our focus back squarely to the Leafs' impact here. If John Shaka actually pulls the trigger on these moves, what does the fallout look like? Let's detail this asset avalanche and see what this astonishing new roster would genuinely look like out on the ice. I mean, just step back and absorb the sheer volume of youth here. If Toronto executes these trades, they assemble an unprecedented core of potential superstars, and they are all under the age of 25. You'd have your current young guys, like Matthew Knies and Easton Cowan, suddenly joined by Michael Misa, plus a draft class featuring Gavin McKenna and top defensemen like Chase Reed or Carson Carrolls. It is quite literally a mind-boggling wealth of talent. And by combining their lottery win with these hypothetical trade returns from, say, San Jose and Chicago, there's a very real possibility of Toronto holding the 1st, 2nd, and 4th overall picks in a single draft year. Just let that sink in for a moment. Holding 3 top 5 picks in the modern NHL is virtually unheard of. It would instantly, like overnight, generate the most exciting, highest-ceiling prospect pool in the entire NHL. Okay, that brings us to Section 5, cap space and the future. Let's dive right into the financial aftermath of all this. Because, this isn't just about the new players coming in, it's heavily about the financial chains finally coming off. Let's see how blowing up the roster permanently unlocks Toronto's salary cap. $25 million. That staggering number is the approximate cap space freed up by moving just 2 massive top-heavy contracts, Auston Matthews and William Nylander. Suddenly, the Maple Leafs go from a team that's basically scraping the bottom of the financial barrel just to sign depth players to becoming absolute power brokers in the NHL landscape. So, how do you utilize that newfound financial freedom? Well, this huge chunk of cap space allows the Leafs to completely rebuild their historically weak defense by aggressively targeting top-tier defensemen in free agency. They can finally be aggressive instead of just reactive. They could even weaponize that cap space by absorbing bad contracts from other teams in exchange for, you guessed it, even more draft assets. It gives John Chayka the ultimate flexibility to execute his vision without constant cap headaches holding him back. Which really brings us to the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves. Is the immediate emotional pain of losing a generational talent like Auston Matthews truly worth the promise of a 10 to 15-year dynasty built on an incredible young core and massive cap space? It's a terrifying leap for any franchise to make, for sure, but the potential rewards are just staggering. It challenges absolutely everything we know about team building in the modern NHL. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this really helped clarify exactly what is at stake right now for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'll catch you next time.